Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about the lessons the housing sector has learnt from retrofit programs. Today's event, sponsored by Waits Living Space, is very much focused on sharing information about what has worked in practice and giving everyone who's tuned in practical takeaways that will help guide their own approach moving forwards. So that's kind of the headline, but before we kick off, a bit of background to set the scene. And I'm sure everybody knows the scale of the challenge the sector faces. The Committee for Climate Change states that the UK's homes accounts for 14% of its emissions of greenhouse gases. And our own research at Inside Housing showed that social landlords across the UK are predicting that the cost of delivering on the government's zero carbon agenda by 2050 will be upwards of 100 billion. And there's a few surveys now that are kind of bearing that out. With targets, step targets along the way, the need for action is increasingly urgent. But with 1 in 6 homes potentially considered uneconomical to upgrade, and we'll probably come to that in our debate a bit later, that's from a survey of 138 landlords taken last year, it can be tricky to identify what stock is suitable to retrofit and what work to do first, given the size of the task. So today, we'll be asking organisations that have already embarked on their journeys how they have planned their budgets and applied for funding. We'll be asking about the results from their projects so far, what's worked and what hasn't, and how they are measuring success. So there's loads to get through today, and I'll introduce our panellists in a moment. But before I do, let's check the mood in the room first. We've got a quick question to help guide your conversation and find out a bit more about where you're coming from today and where you are in your own retrofit journeys. So our warm-up question is, have you begun your own retrofit program? And the options on the screen right now are, yes, we started a few years ago, yes, we started work just this year, no, but plan to in the next 18 months, and I don't know. So hopefully not too many of the latter today. And if you don't know, that's your first job this afternoon, is to go and find out. So just a few more seconds to give people a chance to click on that. And we'll move to the answers now. So let's see where people in the room are today. So yeah, let's move to the answers and let's get a feel for where everybody is at today. Nope. Looks like there's a few problems getting those answers up on the screen for some reason. Here we go. Right, so where we are, a bit of a split, as you might expect. We've got, yes, we started a few years ago. Yes, we started work just this year, roughly not quite evenly split. So 35%, that's a third in the room, started a few years ago, but many more either starting work this year or planning to in the next 18 months. So you can see roughly we're at quite early stages for a number of people and why spreading some of that learning is so important. So in order to do that, as I mentioned, we've got a panel of experts to guide us through things today. We'll be hearing from James Traynor, Managing Director with ECD Architects, Ben Williams, Client Relationship Manager with Waits Property Services, Jeanette Hodges, Head of Carbon and Operations at Orbit, and Joanne Drew, Director of Housing and Regeneration at Enfield Council. Right, it's an absolutely jam-packed programme, so let's crack on, and we'll have a chance to discuss and ask questions after the presentations. So please do use that Q&A box to ask questions, and I'll get to as many as possible to make it as useful as possible for you in the discussion that follows. Yeah, welcome, James. The floor is yours. It's over to you.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So I will move on to introduce myself. As Martin said, I'm Managing Director at ECD Architects. With our sister company, Keegan's, we've been involved in retrofit projects for many years. And a bit of background to that, we're a group company overall of about 85 people with offices around the country, head office in London, and a full range of retrofit services. We do assessment, coordination, design, evaluation, and cost consultants within the company. We've been involved in numerous retrofit projects over many years. Deep retrofit really starting with the Retrofit for the Future programme back in 2010, and then many other projects since then, some of which are fairly high profile. Enfield retrofit projects, the Wilmcote House project, which featured in the book on Enfield, the eco lad schemes, several large schemes across the country, social housing decarbonisation fund projects, obviously Wave 1 just announced the other week, but also demonstrator projects as well. And Energiesprong, if you may not be familiar with that, but it's a Dutch initiative which is starting to take traction in the UK, but essentially about a performance guarantee for retrofit. We're involved in several schemes at the moment, as mentioned there. So that's us. Really, just to move on, before moving into the sort of conversation about retrofit, I suppose it's worth just saying retrofit assumes that we're not going to knock anything down, or not knock the building down, and that actually is a fundamental question, which we've helped several clients discuss the pros and cons of at a strategic level, really, because sometimes buildings can be in a very poor state, and it may be necessary to knock them down. But actually, retrofit is, in terms of embodied carbon, the materials used in the structure particularly, it makes a huge amount of sense to try and retain buildings. And obviously, if retrofit is your starting point, well, that's happening anyway, but it may not always be the case. And this is a study we did with Sheffield University a few years ago for a tower block we were looking at for Newham, which had been earmarked for demolition. And we showed that the 3 retrofit options were fundamentally much lower embodied carbon than the new build and demolition option. So I think that's worth saying, that when we talk about carbon emissions and retrofit, it's important to consider that at the beginning. Lessons learned. I've been asked to talk about lessons learned from the retrofit projects that we've been involved in, and there's many lessons really, but I suppose one of the most important lessons is as a client, as a housing landlord, a housing association, local authority, any housing provider, you really need to understand your stock in a much more granular level than might traditionally be the case. So EPCs are really not a reliable tool in themselves to understand the real performance of buildings, and you really need to have a much better understanding in order to know where you're going to get to, or how you're going to get to net zero. So we've helped several clients produce feasibility studies based on a handful of properties, and how that can then be applied to a wider range of their stock and understand the pros and cons. So we typically use the Passive House Planning Package, PHPP, to model the real performance of the building, compare that against energy bills where possible, look at the technical solutions for that property type, and then consider the potential phasing. So are you looking to do all of the things that you need to do to get to net zero in one go, or do you think, or is it sensible to do it in potential phases? What are the cost implications, whole life cost, and what's the implications for your wider stock? And then crucially, often the case that we might uncover latent defects which need to be addressed before the works are undertaken. So we've come across properties where the walls are saturated, cavity walls are saturated, for instance, where actually insulating externally would have locked in a problem. That problem needed to be resolved before we could do the work. So doing a thorough investigation of what you've got, and not just taking a blanket approach across all your properties. The other thing is understanding the granular level what your properties are like, and what the archetypes are. And this is our definition really of archetypes being the construction typology of the building, whether it's traditional or some non-traditional type, whether it's perhaps an end terrace property, a mid terrace, is it a flat, on what floor, all of those things that make a difference to the energy performance of the building, understanding those. And then particularly in the case of private properties, but also in affordable housing, what are the variants? And a variant for us is any alteration that's been made to the property post-construction that will have a material impact on the proposals we might make. So has it been extended? Has it been modified? Has it been a loft conversion? All those things that can have an impact. understanding the limits of your project, and you might be working on a property that you own, but the adjacent property is a leaseholder, and they have no intention of doing any works. What are the risks to your property and their property at that boundary wall, and how do you avoid that? Considering the thermal bridging that occurs if you don't insulate that neighbouring property, how do you avoid condensation, mould growth in that area? Making sure that you understand that, you model it, and this is a particular project we're working on where we've looked at the construction type, looked at the insulation, and based on the modelling, it's shown that there is a recommendation from our retrofit coordinator. We can recommend that they proceed, but that had to be understood. The modelling had to be carried out before we could proceed, because actually, in this case, they're proceeding without the internal wall insulation. So that diagram on the little drawing on the left-hand side shows how you would mitigate the heat loss through the party wall by insulating internally. Well, that particular landlord didn't have the money to insulate internally, and if that modelling had shown that there was increased risk of mould growth, they wouldn't have gone ahead with the project, because we wouldn't have been able to sign it off as retrofit coordinators. So in this case, we were able to proceed, but that needs to be understood at an early stage. And what is the responsibility of the retrofit coordinator? Who are they appointed by as well? Monitoring, incredibly important, and past 2035 enshrines that feedback loop, measuring the performance against the targets that you've set, and then escalating if defects are identified. It's important to say also who is undertaking your monitoring, and are they independent of the installer? So we are appointed sometimes by contractors on behalf of local authorities or housing associations, and we say we can undertake the questionnaire, but we can't do a complete retrofit evaluation because we're not independent of our appointment. If the local authority or the housing association appoint us directly, then we can do a full investigation and evaluation. Monitoring, very important, and really for the cost of the monitoring, it's really invaluable information is possible if you build that into your project from the beginning. So in this particular project, we were monitoring temperatures in a whole range of properties in the bedrooms and the living rooms. Some residents had their windows open from March to September, pretty much permanently. Others never opened their windows. And we could see the difference in internal temperatures, and we could see the impact of spikes in the external temperatures. So in a heat wave, what is the impact of the residents? Similarly, in the winter period, what is the impact? So that's really, really valuable and available at a fraction of the cost it was even just a few years ago. And then finally, for me, understanding the impact of the works on the residents, especially on large complex buildings. What's your engagement strategy? How are you working with the residents to shape the design solution? How can you reduce the impact? And how are you capturing feedback, not just before, but during and after the works, so you can learn the lessons for the future. And there's a really good report there by LSE with Rockwell a few years ago on one of our projects called Retrofit to the Rescue, which is available as a free download, so worth looking for online. I think that's 7 or 8 minutes from me. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fabulous stuff, and a number of issues I think we'll be wanting to pick up on in the question and answer session that follows. And just a reminder to everybody tuning in, there's lots of questions coming in already by the looks of it, but do use that question and answer box to make sure that when we come to the discussion afterwards, that we make it as useful as possible to you and give you as many takeaways as possible for your day-to-day jobs. So please do get asking there. Thank you very much, James and Ben. Welcome. And the floor is yours. It's over to you.
Thank you very much. Let's move the slides on. Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Ben Williams from Living Space, leading on our carbon zero strategy with our customers. So just a brief introduction into Waite's Living Space. So we provide strategic asset management solutions, including planned and responsive maintenance, fire safety, retrofit works to around 50 social housing providers across the UK. In terms of our retrofit experience, we're one of the first main contractors to become PAS 2035 accredited, and we now have currently around 17 retrofit projects to PAS 2035, with the customers listed at the bottom of the slide. We're delivering energy efficiency measures to around 2,500 homes, with a total project value of around £43 million. So 14 out of 17 of these projects we've secured external funding, 3 LAD schemes, 4 SHDF demonstrator projects, and we're recently successful on 6 SHDF Wave 1 projects where we supported our customers to secure over £10 million worth of funding. So we're very much well versed with the funding and compliance requirements which goes with the projects. I think the first and perhaps most important lesson for me is around PAS 2035. I think it's absolutely critical that the sector gains a thorough understanding of the principles of PAS 2035. It is a fundamental change to how projects should be procured, designed and managed. I believe there's an acceptance around a compliance framework that's required within the sector to ensure there are sort of no unintended consequences. We only need to look at the disrepair issues within the industry, particularly around sort of damp and mould, to see evidence of this. So we really need to embrace PAS 2035 quickly. I think there's no escaping the fact that delivering PAS 2035 compliance involves a lot of detailed work to be carried out by the relevant retrofit professionals. So, for example, there are 114 activities alone for the retrofit coordinator to complete. So it is necessarily complex, and the amount of work should not be underestimated. I think there's a clear distinction between the progress and success of projects where we work with experienced and knowledgeable PAS 2035 compliant companies, which is why we've developed a partnership with Energy Specifics, one of the leaders in PAS compliance. I think the competencies very much need to extend all the way down to the supply chain. So it's critical to develop a network of PAS 2030 accredited supply chain partners. What Wates have also been doing, and what is also really important for us, is around supporting some of the local SMEs make that transition to ensure we also benefit the local economy. We have to start to recognise the value and not purely look at the cost. I think the Retrofit Academy have advised caution about any service that offers a price point so low that it can't feasibly include the PAS 2035 steps. The second key point for me, I'm sure you hear it a lot around today's conversation, is around data. I think the accuracy and reliability of data has certainly been a challenge, with many sort of fragmented asset management systems and sampled data sets. Data is absolutely critical to making smart, informed retrofit decisions and will be absolutely key to supporting housing providers towards decarbonisation. The good news, however, is that part of the PAS 2035 process, we are collecting a really rich source of data. So that's through retrofit surveys, energy modelling, thermal imaging and sensors, which allows us to make more informed decisions based on facts. The key conversations we're now having with our customers is how we can share and integrate this information with them and how data can be managed in the future. I think with this level of data and sort of the compliance approach around PAS 2035, we're working with our design partners to produce BIM models, asset tag products. So there's fantastic opportunity to also support the golden thread. I think a key part of the success of the SHDF Wave 1 bids we supported is that we really built up that accurate data through the retrofit assessments and energy modelling, which provided BAEs with the confidence that we could achieve these outputs. And I think this will be even more important for Wave 2 applications, where housing providers will really need to differentiate themselves to secure funding. Next key point is around resident engagement. So residents absolutely need to be at the forefront and centre of this conversation. They need to become the champions for retrofit. I think while residents often have the most to gain in terms of fuel poverty or a healthier home, they can often be unaware or apprehensive or reluctant to change. So it does require excellent communication and education to change this. We have to really understand the motivating factors. Clearly demonstrating savings on bills resonates with most people, but also we found explaining the environmental context or the journey that landlord is on is well received too. We work closely with TPAS who've carried out an interesting research project on around fuel poverty. Where campaigns focused on fuel poverty were not actually a success. so people don't identify with fuel poverty. So a focus on a healthy home messaging worked much better. Clearly, one of the best ways of having engagement is around positive stories or experiences from residents. So case studies, resident endorsements are absolutely vital. On the flip side, however, we need to be mindful that the bad news does travel fast too. So we just need to be mindful of that. I think it's critical to have energy literate staff engaging with the residents. So Waits have upskilled our sort of resident liaison officers, our customer sort of facing staff to be able to talk to the residents knowledgeably about energy efficiency measures or new technology installed. With the renewable technologies such as PV, heat pumps, and increasing amount of sensors within the homes, I think demystifying this technology will be absolutely critical to the success of retrofit. So I think there's a real opportunity for the sector to collaborate and share best practice in this area to really develop tried and trusted messaging that everyone can use. My last point is around sort of asset management and the wider asset management strategy. So I think we've really got a unique opportunity to look at how we integrate energy efficiency measures into the long-term asset management strategy and investment strategy. We can't simply look at this in isolation. It has to be a holistic view of all the assets and the programs that are being managed. So on many of the contracts where we're working with our customers to maximize efficiencies within existing planned maintenance programs, such as upgrading the windows, doors, roofs at the same time as perhaps installing EWI, which results in a lot of increased in savings and also importantly minimizing disruption to residents. I think the retrofit plan allows landlords to really optimize the timing of measures to suit budgets and programs, as long as they're done in the correct order. On many of our contracts, we've given consideration for future proofing, so making properties heat pump ready or reinforcing roofs for possible PV. I think SHGF Wave 2 provides a real significant opportunity to maximize these efficiencies. And those are the conversations we're having with our customers and the market needs to really consider. We need to ensure, I think the contracts procured allow for an integrated approach, perhaps a move away from more single trade measures to enable retrofit at a greater scale. And I think the last point is around collaboration. Collaboration is absolutely critical. And we're working with on a long-term partner contract with Crawley Homes, and we're working alongside the other contractors, including the heating contractors, to develop Crawley's retrofit strategy. So collaboration is fundamental for me. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass back to Martin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben, and a number of questions coming through relating to both of the presentations so far. So a lot for us to get our teeth into very shortly. Do keep those questions coming in. So just a reminder that Q&A box is there. Ask away, and I'll get to as many. There's a range of issues being raised, so we'll pick up on that very shortly. Thanks for a great opening presentation there, Ben. Very much appreciated. Jeanette, welcome. Good to see you, and I'll hand over to you now. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Martin. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeanette Hodges, Head of Carbon and Operations at Orbit, which is a housing association with a portfolio of over 45,000 homes in the Midlands, East and South of England. This afternoon, I'm going to share some of the challenges and, most importantly, the learnings that are emerging from one of our decarbonisation projects, and touch on some key asks as well that I believe we need at a policy level to support the decarbonisation of social housing moving forward. So Orbit's project is focused on improving the energy efficiency of 69 properties in Stratford-on-Avon, which has 75 designated conservation areas, over 3,000 listed buildings and areas of outstanding natural beauty. All of the properties in the project are EPC band D or below, and they include a mix of solid wall houses and bungalows, which are inherently hard to treat. We were delighted to secure £1.45 million of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Demonstrator Fund, and Orbit are investing a further £2.2 million into the project. Our performance targets include increasing properties to an EPC band C and reducing energy demand from an orbit average of 202 kilowatt hours per metre squared per annum to 50 kilowatt hours. To achieve this, we're completing a PAS 2035 compliant deep whole house retrofit following Fabric First principles. So looking at the challenges, well, the scale and cost of the task ahead is huge. A recent report by Savills estimated the cost of full decarbonisation by 2050 to housing associations to be at least an additional 36 billion. Grant funding will certainly have a part to play in that, but I think it will only really act as a market stimulus rather than fully fund the decarbonisation of our homes. And there are also competing priorities to consider, such as building safety within the sector. Within the supply chain, whilst we have to recognise that there will always be times when the market's more volatile, recently we've seen Brexit, COVID, the Suez Canal, competing projects such as HS2 and converging funding streams, and they've all had a resource impact on labour and materials. Now, whilst we're starting to see a slight improvement in material availability, price increases really are still prevalent. Our biggest challenge on this project, though, has been procuring our supply chain from a standing start. The time to procure on this project took more than double normal timescales. Markets really don't like uncertainty, and contractors will either price that risk in or they'll opt out if there's alternative contracts which don't have tight timescales, short contract length, deep whole house retrofit and PAS 2035. We do need consistency on timelines, messaging and contract length, as well as long-term secured funding to give the supply chain the confidence to actually invest in these areas. Now, at a project level, we've found some structural issues and remedial repairs, as well as customers' own installations, and such as conservatories and extensions. Planning has also been a key challenge, as I mentioned earlier. We're right in the heart of Shakespeare country, and we've had to apply for lawful development certificates or full planning permission for the majority of homes in the project, which has added both cost and time. Customer engagement has been more remote during COVID, but maintain good access rates by explaining the benefits to our customers. There are a lot of preconceptions and myths surrounding renewable technologies, and I think it's my role to help make these changes simple and intuitive for our customers. Similar to when you get into a new car and you want to drive it, you don't want to have to read the manual first. You just want to get in, quick orientation, and off you go. I don't think our homes should be any different to that. Now, the challenges we've faced, they have made mobilisation on the project longer than expected, and we've only just started on site this month. So what have been the key lessons for us? Well, fundamentally, good data. That's absolutely key to any project. If you're following a PAS 2035 route, you'll need to carry out dwelling assessments in advance. You need to ensure that these are sufficiently detailed and that they'll give you early warning of any challenges like planning required or overhead power cables. If you're thinking about applying for funding, start preparing now. Bid windows are relatively short, and you need to have your project scoped and modelled well in advance. Most importantly, though, and a couple of presenters have already mentioned this, don't underestimate the complexity of a project of this nature. There's no common standard or measure for net zero carbon in the sector. VAT can be really complex and can be anywhere from 5 to 20%. And if I had a key ask, it would be a zero-rated VAT policy on energy efficiency measures similar to new construction. Do engage with your customers early, be really honest about the potential disruption, and don't assume that everybody will know what you mean when you're talking about external wall insulation. Be prepared to show rather than tell your customers. By that I mean have supporting photographs or samples of, for example, render finishes to help a customer really visualise what their home's going to look like after the measures. And do remember that some of these changes can be quite emotive. Our specification removes a small top opener in windows because with proper ventilation, they don't have to be in place and they can actually introduce drafts. By explaining this to customers in advance and gaining this understanding up front, it's much easier than having the conversation when the fitters are actually on site. We're also creating a demonstrator home so that customers can come and see the finished product for themselves. If planning's required, don't rely on your local authority having the resources to carry out pre-application discussions, and do apply early. Again, a key ask on a policy level would be a consistent approach to planning across all local authorities with permitted development rights that allow measures such as external wall insulation to be installed without the need for full planning. So always have a plan B and a plan C, whether it's for nesting swallows or remedial works. At Orbit, we've developed an expert client unit approach with colleagues PAS 2035 qualified, so they can recognise and intervene early if things start to go off track. But most importantly, have a reserve list of properties for your project, surveyed and ready to go. So looking ahead at Orbit, we're feeding all the lessons discussed today at an asset level into our property passports. We've also published our Orbit to Zero carbon roadmap, which shows how we've created our baseline in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and then use science-based targets to model and align our future emissions. We've made a firm commitment within Orbit to achieve net zero carbon in our own organisation by 2030, and becoming net zero carbon in our customers' homes and supply chain before 2050. Recent research within Orbit showed that 1 in 4 of our customers questioned had gone without heating in the past 12 months to save money, with 45% spending more than 10% of their take-home pay on energy costs. That's over double the UK average. We really are on a head-on collision course for an energy crisis. Average bills are due to increase by £700 a year. Costs of living are rising, and this just gives our work even more a sense of urgency. We need to develop projects that we can deliver at pace and at scale to respond, and we need to ensure that our customers are at the heart of this journey. That's everything from me. I look forward to the questions and discussion. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Really, fascinating presentation, and again, some key issues to pick up on there, including, I mean, you can see our customers still on the screen there. I mean, I think, that kind of relationship between residents and landlords we'll certainly be talking about, and some questions coming through on that as well. Questions coming through about financing, about ventilation, about that regeneration v retrofit discussion. So yeah, lots of questions coming through, but just a reminder, if you are tuning in, this is absolutely your opportunity to ask questions that are going to be really useful to you moving forward. So do use that Q&A box, and we after the last presentation, we'll move on to picking up on as many of those questions as possible. So get them coming in. Right, thank you very much, Jeanette. Joanne, welcome, and it is over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Martin. The context for what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is the work that we've been doing as a Housing Directors Network in London on our retrofit, Pan London retrofit plan. And that's part of the London Council's 7 climate change initiatives. So it's one of the really exciting ones that we as Housing Directors are pleased to be leading on. One of the others is around low carbon development, and we are working very closely with that group because 40,000 new homes are being built in London every year, and at the moment they all require retrofitting. So we kind of think we've got a big enough task on our hands with retrofitting the 4 million London homes that we have. So we really want to get upstream and start tackling new build as well. So in London, we have a really good framework now, which can be circulated on the chat for delivery of EPC-B by 2030 and net zero after that. And it gives some options and pathways for boroughs. And we're talking about cross-tenure action to approach the initiative in their own way. So London councils have around 3 160,000 homes. So it's a large stock holding role that we have, as well as the influencing role on our communities. And in my own borough in Enfield, we are progressing on the plan. So I'm going to talk about some of our experiences there. But I think the three main areas that I would pull out for discussion today from that agenda are, first of all, the need to think strategically about your retrofit strategy in conjunction with your asset management plans, whilst also delivering quick wins, because the clock is ticking, as we all know. Skills and capacity agenda, both within landlords and within our supply chains. And also, how do we create solutions at place-based level, multi-tenure, multi-ownership? So how do we do that? And I'll also pull out some asks of government, and Jeanette has already covered some of them. So we're on the same page with those things. So the first priority is around planning strategically, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So we know that if you're a building owner, it's a tough time to be in that business, if you like. We have the agenda around building safety, quality homes, as well as decarbonisation. And if you're in London, you're also facing the multiple pressures of homelessness and new housing supply being a priority. So if you've got a housing revenue account, you're having to address new supply and investment in stock. So that's a real challenge. And one of the reasons why, alongside the vast majority of boroughs who've called a climate action plan, have sort of called on government to provide the funding for the climate change initiative. We in Enfield have been very proactive, having called on government to provide the funding. So we have bid for every single funding programme. We've already previously done a demonstrator project on heat pumps in 8 high-rise blocks on one of our estates, for which we have sort of learned some really good lessons. And so our programme covers the whole range of different solutions. But after all that activity, we have got a retrofit solution for 800 homes, in addition to our heat pump agenda. So I think there's a lot of activity required, and we need to ramp up the pace at which we are delivering those interventions. So we're also working, I think, as Ben said, how do we make best use of our existing plan programmes, and how do we do the best we can to build the retrofit actions that we need from a fabric perspective in particular. So, you know, things like our action plan says we will stop replacing gas boilers by 2023 with new gas boilers. It's not always technically possible to do that. Some places don't have enough space. It's not, you know, there aren't the solutions in place ready. So if we are going to replace with a gas boiler, then we'll make it the most efficient we can. We'll make it so it can convert to hydrogen if that becomes a solution. And we'll work with residents to help them use the boiler in the most efficient way to reduce carbon emissions. So that's kind of pragmatic solutions that we're taking short term. I think so I think the ask for government in this space to enable us to be more effective at the strategic planning agenda for all our stock is to really fully fund, commit to the fully funding of the retrofit programmes that it announced in its manifesto. That will help, we believe, give long-term certainty to the supply chain, and will enable us, with published programmes, to enable us to sort of build in our match funding requirements over our business plans. So we think that's a really important thing that needs to happen. On the skills agenda, I mean, it's a big ask for our asset management teams, isn't it? Addressing these multiple agendas, and it's a new way of thinking as well. So we're very used in asset management to sort of valuing the economic life of a property, and Martin in the introduction said, you know, 1 in 6 properties may be deemed to be uneconomic if you through the retrofitting agenda. Now we need to think a bit differently about that in terms of how do we assess the value. And, we are, by retrofitting, we're obviously helping to avoid the costs of flooding and extreme weather events that, as we know, in the last week, causes considerable damage and cost to our property portfolios. So I think we need to think a little bit differently about how we are evaluating the costs for retrofit, and because we don't want to be, and we certainly can't, dispose of stock that just isn't uneconomic to deliver, because somebody's got to retrofit it. So I think that's a kind of big mindset issue that the assets sector needs to kind of start to think about. We also need to think whole building solutions rather than technical disciplines that we might have brought up until now. And how do we do that? Because the interplay between fabric and energy is so important to get the right solution for a home and for residents. So I think that's an agenda that we need to be working on in terms of skills and capacity. The supply chain as well, it's a challenging time for the supply chain. We need to extend the range of skills that the craft sector already has, and we certainly need to grow the volume and capacity of that sector. But we're also looking at an industrial-based skills sector as well, with initiatives like Energy Sprung. So there's definitely a more complex skills and capacity agenda that we need to address. So our second ask of government is to work with us on that comprehensive support programme for the green skills agenda. And of course that's so important for boroughs, because it's about boosting jobs for local people and supporting the green economy. So it's got some double benefits from an economic development perspective. My final kind of issue to pull out for the plan is, how do we tackle the solutions of retrofit at a place-based level? Now, as a borough, we obviously have a focus on places and communities, regardless of who owns them, who lives in them. And so we are ideally placed, we think, to help convene all the partners in the space to deliver place-based regeneration strategies. We also have planning gain that we can lever in terms of investing in carbon reduction schemes. And we have, when we're dealing with regeneration and new build, we've got constructors and supply chains already on site and available on site for years. So how do we use those creatively to also tackle the wider retrofit agenda? So at Enfield, we're at the design stages on one of our regeneration schemes. It's called Joyce and Snell's in Edmonton. And we're working on making an offer to local private homeowners. So we could fund and carry out the refurbishment of their homes alongside the new build regeneration on the multi-tenure estate. And then we can work with RPs to align their investment programs so that all comes together. And the benefit for private owners is that they would then sort of materially benefit from the regeneration uplift that results from the regeneration. And so some form of equity share from the borough in return for that upfront investment is a sort of way in which we can keep whole communities able to participate, afford and deliver place-based retrofit solutions. So we're looking on those kind of equity share models that might help to deliver for private homeowners and private renters. So I think the final ask for the Retrofit London programme on government is to kind of develop a long-term decent homes type funded programme for regeneration and retrofit together. So if we could have more joined up place-based funding, that would be tremendously helpful to us. And also we absolutely support the case for zero VAT rating on retrofit initiatives, which again we think will be really beneficial to the sector in terms of delivery. So those are my kind of three main areas to pick out from our plan, and happy to answer any questions, Martin.
Thank you very much, and a huge amount to get through. We've got 15 or 16 minutes left for questions. A reminder to keep those questions coming in the Q&A box, and I'll get to as many as possible. And there's certainly some themes emerging as far as I can see in the question box so far. So we'll come on to that so far. So thanks for some absolutely fantastic presentations so far. Loads and loads of practical takeaways there, and some food for thought as well. And definitely government, if you're listening, some lobbying there as well. Right, I will move on to those questions that are coming through and pick up on, like I say, as many as we can, and some themes emerging. So I might move on to some of the themes that quite a few people seem to be talking about, this kind of balancing either of priorities or different objectives. I think so. There's a little bit about net zero and building safety, and also let's dive straight into one of the big themes that was touched on in a few presentations there, about perhaps regeneration and retrofit as well, we've just been hearing about different approaches, and where councils and others might differ. So a question from Marcus. This is about, I'll pick up on a couple here. Marcus asking, while the ultimate objective is net zero by 2050, are other housing associations looking at just achieving EPC C by 2030 in order to extend operational life of assets, knowing full well the asset will never achieve an A rating? And then kind of a follow-up question from Marcus, and I'll move to you, Jeanette, first, because he says, for Orbit, you spent over 50k per property in Stratford just to get to an EPC C. Had you looked at redevelopment, and what is a plan to get to EPC A, if indeed that is possible? And there's a few questions along the kind of cost of retrofit v regeneration. So I think let's dive straight into that issue, because I think that's going to be a huge talking point in years to come, and certainly a few people tuning in today are interested in that. So Jeanette, over to you first.
Great, thank you. So within Orbit, we're taking a worst first, fabric first, no regrets approach when looking at our long-term plans. So yes, Stratford has had a higher element of spend on it, but for each property that we're putting through retrofit, because we're following PAS 2035, we're creating that medium-term plan. So we can actually model, and we do model each of our properties to look at that medium plan, to look at what the plan is through to 2050. And obviously, as we move through to 2050, we can take on changes to SAP ratings, and we can also see how the decarbonisation of the grid will affect each of those properties, and see how we model and how that impacts through to an EPC rating. So that's the approach we're taking. So we're looking at fabric first, then looking at clean heat, then we'll move through to renewables and technologies, so giving that a little bit of time to understand what, for example, the government strategy is on hydrogen, and also for technology to advance and improve, and hopefully for the market and the supply chain to settle down in terms of costs as well as we go through to 2050. So it will be a journey. There are some quick wins, I think, a lot on the way, but I think I would not want to be chasing the numbers. It's very much a no-regret strategy and the long-term view in mind.
Thanks very much, and I will come to you, Joanne, actually on this as well before moving to the others, because you were talking about that kind of the local area view, that kind of overview that the councils might take that might be different to the view of others operating within those areas. So how are you looking to coordinate, and is there a kind of tension in play there between retrofit and regeneration? So Joanne, over to you.
It's a really timely question for us at Enfield, because one of our plan programmes included a holistic deep retrofit of a 23-storey high-rise building, so with multiple investment requirements, complex to deliver, and through the construction management process that we've been adopting, costs have escalated considerably to the point where we are now saying, is this the right thing to be doing to invest in this block? And we're coming to the conclusion, but we're coming to the conclusion, because of the nature of the housing in the area in which it's located and the opportunity to do something, to use that as a catalyst to do something different, we're coming to the conclusion that it probably is not worth investing either for existing residents or future residents in that building. So yes, we might take a different view, whereas if that situation hadn't arisen, it wouldn't have come up as a priority for regeneration, because we couldn't have delivered it economically. But the retrofit issue has now brought that to our attention. But we have 53 high-rise blocks in Enfield. We simply cannot afford, or can we respond to the housing needs of people to decant at that scale. So we are going to have to be selective about that agenda, and we're going to have to be pragmatic. But certainly the old way of valuing whether a property is economic to retain or not is we're looking at carbon offsetting initiatives in conjunction with that.
Thanks very much, and I will move to the rest of the panel to come in on that if they want to. But I just want to make sure we get through as many questions and the many different themes that people are raising as possible. There's some kind of tech related questions which I'll kind of throw in here. There's one from Marcus. Have you found remote monitoring using intelligent thermostats to provide useful data? So that this question of data that I think a couple of people were raising earlier. So Ben, I might come to you on that. And there's a question for Jeanette, but I thought I'll throw it into the mix here as well from James. Has any sensor technology for remotely monitoring atmospheric conditions in properties being considered for helping to tackle fuel poverty issues? I think so. A few questions along the lines of what kind of monitoring is there? How are you looking to pick up on learning? And I think a couple of people in the presentations identified data gaps, which is still quite a worrying problem to be having at this stage. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think in terms of the monitoring, yes, we're delivering a lot of monitoring, sort of trialing lots of different innovative sensors, etc. And I think it is really successful. I think it's key to understanding how the property operates. It's key to also understand the resident behaviour and how they're using the technology as well. And I think, as I said in the presentation, having this data can really inform the sort of funding applications that we have to actually build the efficiencies and get sort of money through BEIS, etc. So, I think that will be absolutely fundamental, the monitoring aspect going forward. And also it's a key part of the PAS 2035 compliance process as well. Just to touch on the last point in terms of managing budgets and finance priorities, fire safety, retrofit, I think from a contractor's perspective, I think we can just maximise and support customers, maximising the programmes and look at that sort of together, sort of collectively. But I think it's also just recognising it is a huge challenge. I think, the fact that 14 out of 17 of our projects have funding support, I think highlights the fact there isn't necessarily the money there at the moment. So it is a big challenge for our industry to understand and overcome.
Thanks very much. And on that point, James, I'll move to you next. I mean, a question from Owen. How can value for money be justified following PAS 2035? What is the value costs for putting together financial modules and collecting data on its own can exceed 10K when a property value may only be 60K, thinking of traditional terrace property, obviously in some parts of the country. So, yeah, James, you were talking about the kind of reasons for retrofit as opposed to regeneration earlier, but where does that balance lie, and are those difficult decisions? So, James, over to you.
I think in terms of the value for money, I'd say that there's a lot changing in that sphere at the moment in terms of the cost of monitoring. It's dropping through the floor, so it is becoming more and more economic to do monitoring, through smart technologies. I'd also say that it's all about scale as well. So if you are just doing one property, then it really doesn't make sense to, unless you're a private homeowner and you have plenty of resources to do one property and do it very thoroughly. But as a social landlord or any landlord of multiple properties, you can apply that learning across your wider stock. So that cost applied to one property does seem disproportionate, and it is, but applied to 1,000 or 10,000 similar properties, it's very, very worthwhile. And you can also pick and choose on what you decide to monitor. You may not monitor everything. You might just be monitoring temperatures and humidity, or CO2. So those are the sort of three key things that you would be looking to monitor. But yeah, it's you don't have to boil the ocean, if you see what I mean. You can be selective.
Thanks very much. And I think this kind of what success looks like is also a question that's coming through. So let's try and delve into that a little bit more, and then we'll move on to skills in the few minutes that remain. So a question from Joanne, very simple. How do you measure your success? How do you measure the success of the retrofit? Does that vary project to project? Or I mean, we were talking about the problems in measurement in a few of the presentations earlier. So I'll come on to some of the specifics soon. But Ben, just very quickly, I'll move to you there. Is it just varying wildly, or are there common measures of success emerging?
Well, I think if you're talking about certain projects, we have to ensure we meet the outputs of the funding requirements. So that's in terms of whether that's moving up to a minimum band C or certain heat outputs. So there's various things within the funding requirements that we need to hit that would certainly be a measure of success. But I think also it's the residents, it's the feedback from the residents in terms of the healthy home, and also I think we might touch on it in a bit around engaging and involving the whole community, local employment, local economy as well. So there's various sort of measures of success that we would certainly look to measure.
Well, let's just touch on that very quickly, and I'll move on to Jeanette next. But a question from John. I'm interested in retrofit training and how this is addressed to support residents who wish to gain these skills, either as a bolt-on to their existing skills or entrance into the construction sector. And yeah, I'm talking about a retrofit trailblazer meeting in London, but highlighted the fact that there's networks out there, but there's not necessarily a consistent approach. So yeah, interested in that skills building and working with residents, the issues kind of raised there. So yeah, I'll come back to you very quickly, Ben, and then move on to Jeanette on that.
Sure. Yeah, we're involved in a number of sort of green skills and working with London sort of South Bank University to develop curriculums, etc. So absolutely want to be part of any conversation. I think it's a huge opportunity for the sector to gain skills, get the young people involved and engage the younger generations and get them into employment and build back greener, as government would say. So yeah, absolutely happy to be involved.
Thanks very much. And Jeanette, I'll bring you in on those two issues really. So what does success, how do you measure your success? I think I want to get everybody's feelings on that. And then, yeah, absolutely, that kind of working with residents. So both in terms of training, but also where does their voice come in here? There was an event yesterday where co-production was mentioned quite a lot when it comes to retrofit. What are your feelings on that? So Jeanette, over to you.
Thank you. So I think in terms of measures of success, there's no silver bullet here. So we're looking at a range of measures when we have a formal period of monitoring. As Ben said, there's lots of things that we need to do as part of the government funding, but we do air tightness testings. We are using switchy thermostats so we can monitor humidity levels, heat levels, how quickly a property heats up, how quickly it cools down remotely as well. And that will give us alerts for the residents in terms of potentials for mould or fuel poverty issues. We're also looking at thermal imagery both before and after as well as the energy demand performance, the kilowatt hours and the EP rating. So a whole range, a suite of measures I think are really important to get that balance as to what's success. Customer satisfaction, absolutely. up front. So we're talking to our customers throughout the project. We are working with UCL, who are doing some research on thermal comfort, because what one customer thinks is comfortable might not be the same for a different customer as well. So we've all got different levels of thermal comfort. So we're looking to understand that as we go through as well. And I've probably forgotten the second half of the question, Martin, if you want to remind me.
No, I think that kind of picks up on that. It was about kind of resident involvement and the resident voice, I guess, in this. So where does that come in, and how much are they kind of leading or certainly part of? I mean, to talk about co-production quite a lot these days. Is that something you're looking at, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, we're certainly looking for opportunities as to the decisions that we can involve our customers in. So, colour choices. We're talking to our customers about alternatives when, for example, we need to move their belongings out of the lofts. Can we offer alternatives which might be better options for them, such as storage, sheds in the garden? So just involving the customers in that journey, and as I say, really making it real for our customers. This is their homes. It's quite disruptive works. We are doing these works with the customers in situ. So I know one of the questions was around decanting customers. We're not looking to do that. So, we really do have to involve the customer so they know what the works will involve, when it's happening, and have that customer liaison and keep learning from that. I think, we're right at the start of this journey. So we've just got to keep talking to our customers. The demonstrator home that we're developing, that's really just to involve our customers and say, what do you want to see more of? What works for you? How do you want to be involved? So, absolutely at the forefront.
Thanks very much. And I think actually I'll point people in the direction of the Northern Housing Consortium's work. They pull together a tenant jury to look at some of these issues, and the recommendations out there tie actually quite closely to some of the things you were saying there. Joanne, I'll bring you up in just very briefly. We're just about out of time, I think, but just on that last point about what you're learning from tenants and residents that may be informing your decision making as you move forward. So what have you learned already, and how are they feeding into the process?
So I think if I can answer the question about what does success look like because I think happy residents with lower fuel bills, particularly in the current cost of living crisis, is one of our key requirements. And that would be something that we are focused on as a borough. We also want solutions that we can repair and keep maintained by our in-house teams and contractors as well. So that would be a key success factor. And we also want homeowners to adopt these initiatives themselves through the kind of promotion of the benefits and how they can access them. So I think, as a borough, we want to reduce our carbon emissions, and a large part of that is caused through housing homes. So those would be our measures of success. Can I just talk briefly about the skills agenda? On our programme, we're working with the Association of Colleges to look at curriculums and offers across London. And of course, what they need is jobs to be ready following these programmes. So part of the strategic planning that is required on this agenda is to get the pipeline of schemes understood to support the education programmes, and then locally with our construction skills academies, whether they're directly delivered or through our partners, to make sure that Retrofit is part of that delivery offer, again allied and linked to jobs that are ready to go. So
thanks very much, and I think a really good place to end, because I mean clearly that's going to be one of the huge issues that actually affects the pace of delivery moving forwards, irrespective of what our ambitions might be. So a key point really to dwell on at this point. We are out of time, unfortunately, so all that remains for me to do is to thank our panellists for a really fascinating discussion and some great presentations. Thank you to all of you. Loads of questions that came in, grouped them thematically, so hopefully we got through a decent cross-section of some of those. Thank you all very much for those questions and for tuning in. Thanks for a great event. So I will see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.